Hey, welcome to Gay Panic Podcast. I'm Perry.
I'm Kyle.
I'm Corvus.
And so I wanted to start this first episode by explaining the name of this podcast because it seems a little weird. So, me and Corv met forever ago, and Corv introduced me to Kyle. And I, literally the first group chat we made to talk to each other, somebody just named it Gay Panic, and it has been that ever since.
I think it was me.
I believe it was me.
So...
What?
You can fight over that. So I really couldn't think of anything else that would really fit us. So, there's that.
Yes, been there for years.
We're going to be talking about the Genshin Impact 4.2 Archon quest.
Yeah.
So, the whole thing. Spoilers, obviously, we're not here to summarize it. We're gonna just kind of be talking about our thoughts on it. Corv just did it, so I'm sure they have a lot of thoughts.
I did it first, I think.
So, I noticed a lot of parallels with this quest. And one of the ones that I saw on TikTok was that Furina and Focalor are very similar to Wanderer in a lot of ways. With that whole, God and human concept and wanting to be one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Like with Wanderer, you have, I guess you could say, a human, quote unquote, wanting to be a god. And then, obviously, with Focalor, you have a god who wants to be human.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, emotional ties to it as well. Like, Wanderer wanting to purge himself of emotions, while Focalor almost seems to want to feel more emotion by creating Furina.
Yeah, she wanted her to feel for her, I guess.
To have the human experience.
And that's kind of the opposite of what the Shogun wanted for Wanderer, because the Shogun didn't want Wanderer to feel, and the fact that he could is why she rejected him, kind of. But Focalor loves her creation, very much so. She loves Furina for being able to feel emotion. And I thought that was really interesting, how kind of opposite but also alike they were.
The Shogun didn't want to assert control over Wanderer, and that's how he misinterpreted it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, they both love their creations, but at the end of the day, the Shogun did not see Wanderer as perfect, per se, and Focalor did see Furina as perfect. And that dynamic about them, too, is also interesting with how they handle being brought into the world differently.
Very true. I think it's interesting how, Furina put up a false identity as an Archon. Meanwhile, Wanderer tried to be an Archon. And two very different experiences, I gotta say.
Yeah. Next thing I had that I thought about was that Inazuma is the only nation to have its ruler be the Archon the whole time, because with Mondstadt, Venti was never really in power, per se.
Yeah, they just kind of, believed them.
Yeah, Liyue Zhongli faked his death so he could become a human.
Wanted to retire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Ningguang kind of took over that role of being the leader of Liyue. And Inazuma, while, the Shogun is a puppet, A is still pretty much the one in control. I mean, nobody really ever questioned that.
Yeah.
And for Sumeru, obviously, for a long time, the Academia was in control instead of Nahida. And then, in this Archon quest, Furina was never the Archon, and now the power has been transferred to Neuvillette.
which was rightfully his in the first place.
Yeah, and I think there's also sort of a discussion around the dragons in general, because a lot of them do want their former powers back, but they're a lot greedier than Neuvillette. Specifically, Apap, which is the Sumeru dragon.
Right.
They very much wanted their power back, and they even saw gods as lowly beings. You know, so I feel like Neuvillette and Storm Terror were probably the most understanding of the dragons.
True. I mean, like a Storm Terror, I guess I don't quite remember as well because it's been a while. But I believe people started to forget about Storm Terror, and then he got corrupted by the Abyss, and that made him get a little kooky, little.
Yeah, I mean, he was in pain, and he thought he had been betrayed, but even after that, he was able to, you know, bounce back and still be companions with Venti.
And then, of course, there's Neuvillette, who, instead of even chasing the power, worked together with the quote-unquote Archon, and was the judge of the people.
One other little thing that I noticed is that we only technically have 2 playable Archons, because, you know, Venti is playable, Zhongli is a former Archon, so the version we get of him isn't really the Archon, I would say. The Shogun is, you know, the puppet for A, so I feel like that doesn't particularly count. Nahida, she counts, but I can see how they were trying to make her less powerful by making her so young and so inexperienced as a god. And then Farina is human, as we found out, and we don't get a playable Focalor because she's dead.
R.I.P., I guess.
I was also wanting to bring up the potential other Descenders, because we know that the Traveler is the 4th Descender, and we've learned that the 3rd Descender is dead, but we still kind of have a little bit of their identity, being the fact that their remains are the Gnosis. So, I was thinking that the 1st Descender would be the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles, and Skirk would be the 2nd one. I feel like those 2 being Descenders would make a lot of sense, considering they look a lot more like Honkai characters, and how they use those elements. I'm not familiar with them. The Sustainer of Heavenly Principles and Skirk both seem to use elements that are exclusive to the Honkai universe, so I think it's very reasonable that they're Descenders, but I feel like Skirk's Master as well could be a contender for one.
That's possible, yeah.
Potentially the Foul could replace the Sustainer, just because the Sustainer feels like a bit too connected to Celestia, because it doesn't seem like Celestia particularly likes Descenders all that much.
And speaking of, wouldn't the other sibling also be a Descender? Or are they considered as one?
Well, that was in the Sumeru Archon quest, that the sibling is not actually in the records of Descenders that the Fatui has.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so we do have more information about who could possibly be those Descenders. I was really hoping that Zhongli would be a Descender, since the chasm was created with his birth, and his birth was like an object falling through the sky.
Right, and also, I believe it was a point made that we learned during the Sumeru Archon quest. If I remember correctly, Descenders still can retain the memories of the former Dendro Archon, Rukkhadevata.
Yeah.
And doesn't he still have, like, memories of her as well?
Yeah, I think that was a thing that I think was, like, an out-of-order thing, because I think technically you could do Zhongli's Archon quest after the Sumeru Archon quest. Or Zhongli's story
okay,
quest.
so it's just
So, It could just be an overlooked thing. I mean, like, with the whole, like, Aranyaka quest line and all that, they did overlook that people haven't done the first 3 Archon quests, because it has blatant spoilers for all of them in it. So, it may have just been something that was overlooked in the writing.
Which is possible.
I really have a lot of questions about the Gnosis, because I want to know how that happened. That the third Descender became the Gnosis. Like, for it to be the specific elements for the gods, do you think the third Descender was similar to the Traveler and decided to maybe give it to them as a gift?
That's a good point, actually. I think they touched upon that near the end of the Fontaine Archon quest. They mentioned how it's likely that they were like the Traveler and able to wield all the elements.
Yeah, and I mean, another possibility that I thought of is that maybe those remains were repurposed by the Heavenly Principles, which I think is also entirely possible.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Something that doesn't make a lot of sense to me is why we're still fighting for the Archons to keep their Gnosis.
Because our goals are the same in the end. I mean, they're trying to save the world. We're trying to save the world while also finding our sibling. While following.
Like, the Fatui's ulterior motives with some of the things they've done, it's definitely, like, not great. But at the end of the day, they're collecting them to try and break down the Heavenly Principles. Because the Tsaritsa also thinks that's stupid. At the end of the day, I feel like the Fatui and the Traveler are really trying to fight the same common enemy.
One's just doing it in a little bit more of a dangerous and forceful way.
Yeah. I'd also gathered some opinions of people on TikTok, mostly ignorant opinions, I feel like. But somebody said that the Archon quest made the Traveler less likable because of how they accused Farina, and I really disagree with that, because there's no possible way we could have known that she was in this, like, ReZero-esque contract that she can't tell anybody about her secret. Like,
Yeah.
the Traveler could not have known that she couldn't do that.
You know, and she wanted to tell. She wanted to. Like, you gotta think, 500 years of keeping that bottled in, trying to do something that you don't even know will work. She was dealing with uncertainty too.
Yeah. There's kind of a lot of people who are obsessed with Farina are kind of just, like, blindsided by anyone else in the story. They're kind of just on Farina's side and only on her side, I feel.
I'm on the Traveler side because, like, they are so tired.
Yeah.
Because they were just, like, their top concern was just that they needed answers.
That too. During this Archon quest, Traveler was a lot more suspicious of people, like when learning Lynette and Lenny's background, immediately turning around.
You know, I get that the Traveler has a grudge against the Fatui, but I feel like the hate towards Lenny and Lynette was a little undeserved. Like, it was a bit too cold shoulder, I feel.
I agree. And while, again, the Traveler's been through a lot, it's still unlike them to do that.
Yeah. Like, treating Child so buddy-buddy, literally, like, minutes before.
He literally almost destroyed an entire nation.
Yeah. He summoned a hecking god.
Yeah, like, Child tried to destroy a nation, and we forgave him over a few Archon quests, but the House of the Hearth really hasn't done anything to hurt anybody from what I can tell, and immediately the Traveler just was no longer trusting of Lenny and Lynette, and I feel like that was kind of rude.
Exactly. I mean, the House of the Hearth on its own has no, like, malevolent background. Same with the Native, really.
It's mainly just, like, investigators and stuff.
Yeah. It's such an argument that I don't think the Traveler likes, but they're just following orders.
Yeah.
Which, one could say, yeah, okay, but if you know it's wrong, you shouldn't. But also, we don't know what the punishment for disobeying orders would be like. Because we know that some fatigue can be cruel.
Yeah, and Child does it for his family, and he still does not want to expose them to the horrors of, like, the things that he's done.
Like pretending to be a toy salesman to protect Tusser from the horrible truth of what he does.
I do truly start to appreciate Child a little more, and I feel like the Traveler's growing kindness also helps, but I also, again, just feel like the cold shoulder to Linny and Lynette was not necessary.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't warranted.
So, back to Farina stands, and their just lunacy sometimes. Like, somebody was acting like we switched up and suddenly like Farina because of the newest quest, and yeah, because I felt like she was a really...
Yeah, because it was a good twist.
She was a bland character before that. Like, I would not like someone like her in real life. I don't like people who are, like, loud and always trying to be the center of attention because they clearly have some sort of insecurity. Like, that's something I feel like they have to work through themselves, but now that I know why she's like that, and the fact that she's been doing it for 500 years because she has to, that's commendable.
I mean, if I had to sing those same songs for 30 years, I'd be a little crazy too. Like, I'm just saying, no, she's probably doesn't really know how to not put up that facade because she's been doing it for so long.
Yeah, and, like, again, the Traveler even points out in their own head that even in her heart, she is still playing an act. I don't know if she could possibly ever put her guard down for the rest of her life.
Because, damn, that's all she's known, is an act on a stage. Forgive me if I get this wrong, Oratrice Mécanique.
Oratrice Mécanique. The other nice Cordonel.
The fact that the Hydro Archon and the Gnosis was just casually chilling in there, pulling all the strings from the side, and just also, she was pulling a gamble too. Gathering all that energy, hoping that it would be enough to, do what she did. All of that plan was a gamble.
Imagine if the Knave had that prior information. That first point, if Linny was able to make it into that room, dunzo, the Archon quest would be over.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no.
He was so close to, like, even just getting the Gnosis.
Yeah,
it could have handed
heard a
it over
voice
to
in
the
there,
Knave, and yeah, could have just called it a day right there, but I mean, that would also probably mess with the prophecy, and it would fail, and I can't even imagine how much worse it would feel for Farina if the prophecy never came true, or if she slipped up.
Because on one hand, if it was all for nothing and everything was okay, well then what was that past 500 years for?
Yeah.
I mean, she would have done all that for nothing.
But then if she would have said something like she almost did to the Traveler, it would have been so close. She would have been right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she couldn't.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Natlin and the dragons? What kind of dragons? Like the type that was the one in Sumeru? Is that...
I mean...
No, those are a part of the ancient dragons, so the only dragons we know are the ancient ones.
I see.
Neuvillette mentioned that they have evolved, so they are nothing like what he is. So, if I had to guess, they're probably
Does
smaller?
that mean we're gonna have dragon characters?
Yeah, maybe more humanoid, maybe?
I hope so.
That would be so
awesome.
cool.
Yeah, because from what I'm thinking, it's like the woolly mammoth. The woolly mammoth was way too big, and that's why they went extinct, and their predecessors are elephants, which are much smaller, still the same thing, but just without, all that excess size and a bunch of other things that they don't
hair.
really need. Yeah, so I feel like that's probably what the Natlan dragons are going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
They probably evolved to no longer need the size of the ancient dragons, because Storm Terror was like, average dragon size. But, like, the Inazuma Serpent and Apep of Sumeru are massive.
Yeah, those things are...
Spanning, like... They span, like, the length of the whole nation, practically. Or at least, like, with the serpent in Inazuma, they are the whole stretch of an island. So that size probably wasn't necessary to modern dragons.
No, probably not. It would probably only make things more difficult.
I mean, APEP has literally an entire ecosystem inside of them. Because that's what the boss fight is. That is, those creatures in the boss fight are a part of the ecosystem inside of there. Like, that's crazy big. The fact that there is no physical model for APEP because they're so big.
It'd probably be like an extra 60 gigabytes onto the game's storage.
Yeah, they're literally an image in the entire desert sky. I cannot imagine that possibly, like, physically being modeled. I wouldn't want to be the one modeling that.
Like, I don't mean to bring up another game for, like, reference, but, like, take God of War, for example, like the 2014 one. There's the World Serpent, which literally spans across the entirety of the map, and then more. It's crazy how unimaginably huge these creatures probably are.
We're gonna stop here. This has been the first episode of Gay Panic Podcast.
Yeah.
See you again. Maybe. Who knows?
Maybe.
See ya.